Good morning. If you're someone like me and you just read horror novels and you have for over 20 years, you have short story collections with just random horror stories in them. I've always had them. When I first started collecting horror stories, my nan, my mum's mum, bought most of my books for me from garage sales and swap meets, shit like that. And so, out of every Stephen King Tommy Knockers or bag of bones I'd get, there was always like the giant book of horror stories, or the best new horror stories, or giant book of zombie stories, or giant book of Christmas horror stories. I had some random ones, but there's been a few that have really stuck with me. There's one called Gathering the Bones. It came out in like 2002. That's getting a review one day because the stories in that are just phenomenal and they really stand out as just an anthology, just better than the rest. And I love that book. But years later, I came across this book, right? Now, my camera's in reverse, of course, so you can't really see it properly, but it's called The Giant Book of Terror, with this guy with all these things coming out of his face, right? It looks like a generic horror anthology, doesn't it? The thing about this book is, this Giant Book of Terror, a friend of mine gave it to me first up. John Rollinson gave me this book years ago. Not this copy, I found this again. And told me I had to read it. So, you flip to the contents page and you see what authors you like. Peter Straub is in there, my second favourite author. Poppy Z. Bryce, she's in there. Awesome stuff. There's all sorts of stuff in here. But what I'm here to talk to you about today isn't the entire anthology, it's the first two stories in it. Now, the first two stories in it, my God. Okay. The first story in this is called The Miracle Mile by Robert R. Mccammon. Now, Stephen King fans out there and horror fans out there, if you've read Robert McCammon, you know he's one of the greats. He's sort of unknown compared to, Clive Barker, Stephen King, Peter Straub when it comes to the horror thing. He's not mainstream. Problem is, his books are better than Dean Koontz, better than Richard Lehman. They're Stephen King with a big R-rated kick right in the guts. Now, I have two stories to talk about, and they're the first two stories in this book, and that's it, right? First of all, I'll explain why I've been away. My youngest son has finally been born. Little Hudson is here with us, and he's gorgeous and fabulous. He's asleep right now, hence why I'm in a robe, and I'm a little bit sleep deprived. And also, shout out to my big boy Jay. When are you going to give your dad a call? I love you, mate. I'm still here. My phone number's the same, and my email's the same. Miss you, mate. Fucking miss you heaps. More than you know. Ring your dad. Love you. It's alright. You take your time. You know I'm here. And I got you. Alright. So back to the story at hand. The first story in here, The Miracle Mile. Robert R. Mccammon. I'm just going to get straight to it, right? So I opened the book and I started reading the first story. It is the story of a man, his wife, their son, and a little baby, and they're driving towards this beach. And it's where this carnival called the Miracle Mile is, on the beachfront, like a boardwalk sort of a place. And it's 8 years ago. It's where him and his Mrs. Alice sort of had the best summer of their lives. The whole life was in front of them back then, and the main character in this is just thinking back to when things were okay. But now in this story, the world is completely taken over by vampires, and it's the end of the world. The story starts with their car breaking down and then having to go in a motel. It's 100 degrees. Now, I'm from Australia, so 100 degrees is 38 degrees. So it's 100 degrees, 38 degrees Celsius. Something like that. It's boiling. The Miracle Mile is in the distance. They haven't made it yet. So they stop to feed the baby and do a couple of things in this hotel room, but there's something in the bathroom, something in the bath, and it's wrapped up in sheets, and it twitches, and it can smell their blood. And it's this incubating vampire, a monstrous thing that they have to shoot and kill. And this is where, we're going into the narrator's head and finding out what's going on. So, a biological accident in North Dakota, created these vampires who escaped, multiplied, and now Japan, Canada, everywhere. The world is ending. These vampires, some of them can look like half snakes. It's evolution gone mad. And they're here to feast on the human race. And there's not many of us left. This guy's got a pistol. He's got his family. Thing is, he's just so angry. And the end of the world, he's just so upset about what his wife and this baby and his son has to deal with. He's borderline insane. And he's just this, he's a scary man. So they make it to the Miracle Mile. They go for a swim in the day. They make themselves something to eat. They do this, they do that. Now, this main character, his plan is to think of the future and save his family. But just as you're reading it, everything is just so terrible. You feel the hopelessness of the world that we've been, given to read. The dad ends up taking the son for a walk. And in a really sad, chilling scene, in the way he sees as mercy, he puts a bullet in his son's temple and comes back for the wife and baby. And the wife's like, Tommy, where are you, Tommy? Like, come to mama now. And the dad's like, it's okay, come for a walk with me on the pier. It'll be all right. He's like, man, do you remember this? And she's like, ooh. And he's like, bang, and puts a bullet in his wife and drops her and the infant off the pier, where they splash. And then he gets the gun and goes. As he's about to pull the trigger, all the lights of the Miracle Mile come on. The roller coasters and the merry-go-rounds all start up, and he can hear the Calliope music and all that kind of stuff. And then he realizes, like, all the vampires and those monsters, they're all here on the Miracle Mile. They're riding the roller coasters. They've taken over the world. And he's wild. He's like, right, you've taken everything from me. And now you're taking the Miracle Mile? Not the mile. He wonders how they rigged it up. They rigged it up, with gasoline and generators to make the whole place run. He's like, well, shit, batteries and gasoline. I can make bombs out of that. Maybe I can get the roller coaster to jump the tracks. He's like, fuck it. I'm not done yet. And he, hiding in the shadows, he makes his way deeper into the Miracle Mile to kill all the vampires there and start battling them because, it's the start of the survivalist story. His vacation is over. The end. That was my first taste of Robert Mccammon. It blew me away. Like, it's written so well. It's written, I can't say it's written like a Stephen King story because I know Robert Mccammon now and I know Stephen King now. They are different writers. But when I read this, I'm like, wow, okay, I've found a writer who's a lot like Stephen King that I can get into, and I love his style and I love his attitude. So I Googled it and I looked for his books. So I read his very first book, Robert McCammon's first book, Baal. I'm not here to talk about Baal, but Baal is excellent. Published when he was 26. I can't remember what year it was published. But it's about the demon from the Bible, Baal, being born in America in the 80s and trying to take over the world. Fucking cool. And dark and very R-rated. So I read Baal. Loved it. I also read in a Stephen King interview that Robert Mccammon, who wrote The Miracle Mile and Baal, also wrote a book called Swan Song. Big book about the end of the world and the devil coming up and good and evil fighting each other on Earth, like The Stand. Stephen King even said he read a book a lot like The Stand, and it's a really good book by Robert Mccammon. It's called Swan Song. So I found Swan Song, and I read that 900-page screamer. That's getting a review one day because it's not as good as The Stand, but it's its own thing, and it's action-packed. Like, I smashed that 900 pages in a couple of weeks. But the violence makes The Stand read like fucking Bambi. So, that's The Miracle Mile. And that's Robert R. Mccammon. So, if you want a little taste of what he does, pick up The Giant Book of Terror or just look for that short story by Robert R. Mccammon. He just goes by Robert Mccammon now, but when I started reading him, that R was prominent in the middle. Since then, I've read Swan Song, I've read The Border, I've read The Wolf's Hour, I've read Blue World, I've read Mccammon. The Border's one of his newer ones. That's getting such a review one day. That's sci-fi horror brilliance. Anyway, my plan wasn't to rant. My plan was to talk to you about The Miracle Mile and the next story. Now, the next story is even better than The Miracle Mile. The next story to me is the reason that book sold. There's a horror writer, a homosexual horror writer named Scott Edelman, or Edelman, however you want to pronounce it. The second story after Miracle Mile in here, it's called The Suicide Artist. Now, this horror story is just unstoppable. And there's a little write-up at the start of it from the editors, sort of explaining why they included this in the collection, why it's so good to them, and it's the same reason why it's so good to me. This story is written in first person, almost as if the author, Scott Edelman, did all this or went through all this, and he's talking directly to you. And he's telling you, what, if you want to kill and die, fuck, there's ways to do it, and there's ways to do it properly. Fucking hell. His writing is so poetic, but it's also so personal. It's just a man talking to you. And first of all, what does he do in The Suicide Artist? He tells you what his childhood was like. His mum left him at school once. All the other kids got picked up, and there he stood as the sun went down, waiting. Everybody disappeared. No one gave a shit. And all of a sudden, a big scary man rocked up, kidnaps him, takes this little boy back to his house, and tries to do terrible things, rape and murder. But this little kid, he manages to hide behind a crawl space until this big scary man passes out. This little kid's looking around this big scary, child murderer's house. And what the guy's done is he's sewn all the little t-shirts together of all the little children that he's fucking murdered. And he's got them in his room like some kind of shrine. It's fucking terrifying. So what does this little boy do? He waits till this monster's asleep, grabs all the t-shirts, quietly wraps this giant's face up and just hugs him with it. And eventually murders the serial killer. Police come, he's taken away, he's put into foster care, whatever. This serial killer is finally, released to the world and everybody finds out. But the life he's lived since then, it turned him into a monster. So now he kidnaps and he kills for the sake of killing. And everything is murder, and that's just the way it should be because that's what humans get off on, right? And that's what the message is for this story. But it's not just a message, it's almost like the writer-narrator is telling you this. And he's telling you in such a way that it's hard to fucking disagree with him, even though the subject matter is so fucking horrible. And then towards the end, he's like, you know what? And I've been getting away with this for a long time. And I can't wait to fucking kill everybody. And you know what? Especially you. I can't wait to kill you. Because you're the sick fuck that needs this kind of story to go to be happy. You're the one that picks up this book, this horrible book, and even in the story, it even says, probably with some really cheap cover on it. It's like he knew what the cover would be. And he's like, and you picked this book up, and you read about the horrible fucking shit that happened to me. And you read it for entertainment. And you read about this serial killer killing kids, and you kept reading. And you're reading right now, aren't you, until the end? Well, while you're reading it, this is word for word, while you're reading it, I'm coming up to you. I've just gotten into your house. You are the reason I kill. So that one day I can kill you. I can reach around and wrap my fingers around your neck and choke you to death. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh. The end. That's the story. He escaped a serial killer. He became a serial killer. And now he's so mad at you. You. For real. And it's chilling and it's so well written. You're almost doing this while you're reading the book, thinking Scott Edelman's behind you and he's going to fucking choke you to death. Could you imagine him reading that at like a book reading at a signing? I'll read The Suicide Artist. Give everybody nightmares forever, and they might not even want to fucking read your stuff anymore. It's scary stuff. So I'm going to leave it there. These stories were written in 1991 and 1992. So I don't have to worry about giving spoilers away. A lot of you probably didn't even know they existed. But I'm glad I got to talk to you about them. Because I've been hanging out to just tell you to go read The Miracle Mile and The Suicide Artist. I don't know if you'll find that book. It's so bizarre that I came across it 10 years later in another secondhand bookstore. Nearly like the same looking copy. It might even be my copy. It's a time traveler. Anyway, Robert Mccammon, man, anything he writes, do it. I haven't been lucky enough to read anything else by Scott Edelman, the guy that did The Suicide Artist. But that might be worth a look. Hunting down more stuff by Scott Edelman. and talking about him to you. So, stay tuned next week where I'm going to finally talk about The Birds by Daphne du Maurier. I've been promising it long enough, haven't I? Look after one another. Read some great books, watch some even better fucking movies, and don't take any shit from anyone. See ya.